Planning Commission for Grand Rapids on Thursday, April 11. We have on the agenda today a presentation about the master plan and an update on the third round of engagement. And that's our only planned agenda item for the day. Sarah. Can your mic?
Sarah, can you pull your microphone a little bit closer?
Turn it on either.
Maybe just
That would be
introduce yourself if you don't mind.
Yes, I'm Sarah Bongiorno, Director with Planning Next, and I'm happy to be back here to present who we heard from and what we heard during our third round of engagement. And at the end, I'm also going to give you a little preview of what we're planning for the fourth round coming up in May. So we've updated the process timeline graphic a little bit to kind of reflect how we've gone through our 4 rounds of engagement. Again, we're gearing up for in about a month the sharing direction, moving forward workshops. We're going to talk more about that as we get further into it, but we are in plan development. We have a draft plan, and so this is really exciting to see all of this work come together. Our plan framework, this hasn't really changed. We've been kind of refining it through some input. This was established with community input, a vision, value threads, and community goal areas from input from the first round of engagement. We then tested it back with the second round of engagement, and now it's been sort of our touchstone as we've worked towards recommendations to make sure that we're upholding the overall vision, values, and the goal areas for the plan. So for the round 3 engagement, we had over 1,105 people participate. We based that number on submitted exit questionnaires. We usually have a pretty good return rate, but because of the different types of engagement we had, I'm pretty sure that actual engagement number is higher. We conducted engagement in a variety of formats. We had 3 in-person workshops back in November that kind of kicked off the engagement round. We had community conversations that were hosted by our community connectors and the neighborhood organizations. We also had an online survey that was open as well. We heard from people living in all 3 wards and majority of the neighborhoods throughout this process, and the engagement ran from November, about mid-November 2023 to the end of February 2024. So who do we hear from? So again, just to orient you to our graphs, the pink line is the Grand Rapids latest census data, and then the teal sort of bar is our round 3 participants. So you can see that we still have a gap in reaching the Black and African American folks. We reached 14%, but we have 19% in the community. So we're working really hard in the 4th round to really focus our efforts on spreading the word and reaching out to that community. The Hispanic Latinx community, we did hear from our round 3 participants. We're right on par, 16% with the GR census data, so that's good. Our age gaps are very similar to what we've seen in the previous rounds. We've still got those elusive 18 to 24-year-olds who are really hard to hear from, but we did manage 7%. Again, there's 14% in the community, so there's still work to be done there. And then the 22% of under 18 is a little bit misleading when you look at it as a whole number, because you wouldn't expect a baby 2 days old or 6-month-old to participate. So really trying to get a little bit more, try to break that age down a little bit more. So on the left-hand side, we provide a few stats there. If you look at the ages 5 to 14 that make up that 10.1%, we're right on, I think, with that 11%. And our under 18 participation round 3 was mainly ages 12 to 17. We had that sort of junior high and high school level. So we feel good about that youth participation number. The gender split has been pretty consistent and pretty balanced. Education, again, we're seeing gaps. We've closed the gap somewhat on that some college, no degree. That's getting closer there at the 16% to 20%. But the high school diploma or equivalent number, 3% of our participants are in that category, and we have 22% in the community. So that is still one of those metrics that we want to really focus in on for our 4th round. We've been communicating these gaps to our steering committee and to our community connectors and neighborhood orgs so that they can help us really reach out and get those folks involved. The wards here, we heard from a good distribution, participants distributed across the wards. We were able to get some participation breakdown, population breakdown by ward for the city estimates there. So we've consistently heard from more people in Ward 2, but they do represent more of the city population in their wards, so that kind of tracks. But you see that we've heard, we've had people coming out from each of the wards. And we do have about 14% in this third round, which is pretty consistent. I think it's been between 12 and 14% throughout the process who live outside the city, but either work or come into the city for services or things. So that's been pretty consistent as well. So our engagement activities, just as a reminder, we had our 3 workshops where we had display boards and recording sheets, and we had them set up around our kind of goal areas for the chapters for the plan: great neighborhoods, vital business districts, strong economy, balanced mobility, development character, and we had a station on the area-specific plans. And so we were really testing some of the big ideas that were starting to shape up within those chapters and testing some ideas with the public that will then help us move into drafting recommendations. The community connectors hosted similar activities, what we call community conversations. We also put together a quick engage survey that the steering committee members used across the community, and of course we had the online survey open as well. This was just a reminder. We asked some questions I'm switching gears here to what we heard, and we had some questions that referenced the different neighborhood types. So you all know this, I think, pretty well, but we have this in here just as a reminder of the traditional neighborhood, mid-century neighborhood, and modern eras, and where those are located within the community. So in the Great Neighborhoods chapter, one of the questions we asked was about the ADUs and where folks thought those should be allowed within the different neighborhood types. You can see the charts here on the left: traditional neighborhood, mid-century neighborhood in the middle, and modern era on the right. And so what we learned from this is the charts look almost exactly the same. So people really are, they're okay with ADUs allowed everywhere, really no matter the neighborhood type. So that was interesting feedback for us as we started to create the recommendations. Pretty strong, between 69% and 74% support. And then we asked in Great Neighborhoods about duplexes. Again, where duplexes should be allowed in the different neighborhood types. And again, 64%, 66, 67% there was majority allowed everywhere. So that was good feedback for us. And then we went and asked about triplex and quadplex. This one, the pie charts start to look a little bit different. The pink allowed everywhere is still majority at between 43 and 47%, but you see some percentages of folks who think that those make sense near business districts and on primary streets. So that was really good as we created recommendations, started thinking about the land use map. In the Vital Business District goal area or chapter, we asked a question about parking. Should business districts prioritize space for people over space for cars by removing parking minimums? That ranked a 3.2 or 3.92 out of 5, so pretty strong support. However, we asked for follow-up comments or any additional comments on that, and we organized them into comments of support and comments of concern. So on the left side there, comments of support. People recognize that there's already a lot of pre-existing parking. People generally supported and re-emphasized that they liked prioritizing people over cars in these business districts. And also a feeling that reducing parking will increase neighborhood activity and vibrancy, and that increased foot traffic will benefit the businesses in those business districts. On the right-hand side, summary of the comment of concerns. We heard comments around that businesses should have a say and choice in how parking is provided, and just an acknowledgement that Grand Rapids is a very car-dependent city still, and that this kind of goes hand in hand with the next bullet about just needing to have more multimodal transportation options that would help with that. There was concern that it will negatively impact the businesses, and there was also a lot of comments around that, just acknowledging that not all neighborhoods are maybe equally prepared to reduce parking based on some of these other things, access to multimodal options and things like that. So that was that we felt we got some really good input on the Vital Business District question. A strong economy, we asked how important it is to preserve areas for manufacturing. This ranked a 3.32 out of 5, so people were generally supportive of that. Some of the comments that we received centered around people understanding that preserving the manufacturing benefits the economy, but also wanting to maintain a balance between manufacturing and other uses. This acknowledgement that there needs to be increase in mobility options to get to jobs, and also just some concerns about the types of manufacturing and would they negatively impact the environment, thinking about it from that perspective, and just a lot of general comments around just needing a larger variety of jobs. In balanced mobility, we asked folks to rank the impact of some certain interventions that could be created to help facilitate mobility in the city. And so we asked them to rank it from 1, least impactful, to 5, most impactful. So the impact of protected bike lanes ranked the highest at 4.17, and then 3.86, the impact of the curb bulb outs at the intersections, the impact of access management at 3.75, and the impact of bus bulbs at 3.30. So those all ranked pretty well. People thought they would be impactful. I'm going to go through now a series of comments we heard on each of these to break them down a little bit more. For the bus bulbs, this is kind of bringing out the sidewalk and street to create more space and have it more visible and easier to load the buses. So under the comments where people felt like it was most impactful, they acknowledged the safer and easier for riders to access the bus. It's easier to identify where those bus stops are. And there was just a general overwhelming kind of comments around just an interest in anything that will help improve transit in Grand Rapids. People are very supportive of that. Some of the least impact comments, there were many participants that just indicated they don't take the bus, they walk or drive, so they wanted to acknowledge that they didn't impact them because they don't take the bus. They were concerns about taking away parking, and there was also acknowledgement that they felt like it was only really going to help or be impactful if that bus bubble also had bus shelter, benches, and other amenities for the bus stop. The curb bulb outs, again, some of the comments around most impactful, people really understood the opportunity to slow traffic and increase pedestrian visibility, preventing accidents, and this prioritization of pedestrians by creating safer, more walkable environments. On some of the other comments on the other side of it, the least impact, there was some comments about it could be confusing for bike traffic as it forces bikes further into drive lanes. So I think just making sure that we're thinking through that. And then there was some comments around questioning the benefit or impact on safety if they really do help with the pedestrian safety. On the access management, on the most comments around most impactful, people did acknowledge that they felt like it was critical on main streets and in busy areas. This increase, pedestrian and cyclist safety and reduce conflict points made sense to people. And again, there was just overwhelming support for anything to increase walkability of communities and safety of pedestrians. On the least impact side, there was significant confusion on this tactic, even though we had a graphic and we tried to explain what it was. I don't think people really understood the access management idea, and so there was some comments that kind of reflected that. There were concerns that it will congest the roads more, or concerns that it won't work or be hard to implement. And then lastly, protected bike lanes. On the most impactful side, people really felt that these were critical to protecting people's lives, that there really needs to be a physical barrier for bike lanes. This sort of feeling that it will encourage more biking and walking instead of driving, the sort of if you build it, they will come notion, and that the lack of these protected lanes creates more car congestion now because you've got bicyclists sharing lanes with drivers. On the flip side, we heard from many people that they not sure that the investment is something that's worthy, I guess, considering that you're not biking year-round here maybe as much, and there's concerns that it will increase congestion. So you can see we're hearing two sides of it there, which is normal out in the community. On the development character chapter, This chapter takes a little bit different form. It's really focused on the future land use map, the character types, and development principles. We tested with folks how important the following design elements are to development character in their neighborhood. So thinking about how development happens in these different elements. And overwhelmingly 3.05 out of 5, the exterior materials were the most important to people. So I think people were really interested in quality materials and things that were consistent with their neighborhood. They also felt like bulk and height were really important as well in parking. And architectural features came in kind of less important. That's sort of the articulation of the facade, window placement, awnings, balconies, things like that. More detail on the buildings ranked a little lower. But I think generally people were, felt that these were important things for us to be thinking about, putting in as sort of design guidelines, if you will, into this chapter. We did do some area-specific planning engagement at our event, but even more so following that, later in February, the interface team who's been leading the area-specific planning work, they met with each of the 3 neighborhoods, and they had some area-specific engagement happen. And so this is kind of a blending of what they've heard. So the things that are in here are not recommendations, are not things that are happening. It's just what we heard from folks during this engagement. So the first one was Creston. And so there was different opinions on increasing density in the neighborhood, but there was, I think, general consensus around denser housing, triplexes and larger, should be at the riverfront or on Plainfield. There was support for ADUs, desire for sort of less red tape and more locations, strong, support for design guidelines and making sure that new development is complementing the existing character, better bike infrastructure, general more housing options, that sort of missing middle housing there. Broad support for infrastructure improvements related to connectivity on Plainfield, connecting to the riverfront and to the overall rest of the city. And there was a desire for improved public transit connections as well. In Butterworth, there was also talk about ADUs, wanting to kind of similar comment about streamlining regulations and increasing the housing options and affordability. Again, safer, family-friendly bike lanes, and some talk about rerouting maybe the truck traffic to increase bicycle safety, provide public access to the riverfront and safe pathways to get there. A lot about protecting the neighborhood character and establishing what that character is. I think there was some notion about, simple and understated, this coziness and charm that they really need to still maintain. There was some pushback on multifamily buildings in the single-family neighborhood, likely tied to some of those homes being rented to students in the area. Others were more supportive, so again, we heard kind of both sides there. Support for adaptive reuse of industrial buildings, especially for sort of art or maker focused, and then general support for increased density along key corridors. And then for the Southtown neighborhoods, we heard that, folks were open to infill development that's denser than single-family housing. Again, consistent with the others, very supportive of adding ADUs within the existing alley network. There was some concern that alleys may need to be improved to support this more fully. And also quality was the most important thing to emphasize, even over matching existing character. I think they were more open to allowing for creativity and innovation in development, but they wanted it to be high quality. Also really shifting focus to transit-oriented development and pedestrian-friendly infrastructure, prioritizing biking and pedestrian pathways over parking. And then integrating more amenities like bus shelters, benches, and green space into the multifamily developments. And also they were interested in exploring options for upgrading existing housing stock from an energy efficiency perspective as well. So that's a lot. After all of that, I think our key takeaways is we felt that people were generally supportive of the overall big ideas and sort of the direction of the plan. They do have specific comments and interests in how that gets executed, which is good. People are generally supportive of the plan's direction on housing, and so now we're really developing recommendations around that input. It's really helped us sort of fine-tune the recommendations that are being developed for the plan. So we've developed recommendations sort of around expanding the variety of housing types and price points based on this feedback, supporting compact centers that provide a mix of uses, looking at increasing high-wage jobs and variety of jobs and decreasing the wage gap, supporting viable transportation options, and then really implementing character types that describe, how development happens and where the growth and development in Grand Rapids should occur in the future. And so we're at the point now where we've got a draft plan. You all have it in your hands to review. Our steering committee is also looking at it as well. We will be making updates to that draft plan with that input before our public sort of release. In May, we have the fourth round of engagement workshops in each ward are happening May 7th, 8th, and 9th from 5 to 7. The bridgetourfuture.com website has all the details. And so we will be sharing out these final or draft recommendations for this final round of engagement. And if all goes well, which I think it will, tentatively the 63-day comment period will hopefully begin towards the end of July. That'll be additional time for folks to provide feedback on the plan as well per the Michigan enabling legislation. I think that's all I had. Any questions?
Thank you. Well done. And I appreciated easy graphs, questions, big print, all those things for us older generation. But as we were talking about earlier, you did a good job of showing ethnic group, gender, age. Did you do anything about whether they were there as a resident, as a business owner, both, or a worker downtown? So it seemed that we were talking earlier a lot were residents. It would be interesting to understand how many businesses were in those discussions.
Yeah, we didn't ask that question in round 3. We could definitely think about adding that for round 4 so we could see exactly the breakdown. We really focused more on the geography of where folks are sort of coming from.
Yeah.
So you're right, I think it was more resident focused.
People might not live in the city, but certainly own or
business
work in
or-
the city, as you noted. And
Yeah.
I thought that was a good statistic that you had in the plan about how many come into the city and how many work outside the
Yes.
city.
Yep.
And I don't know how that compares with others, but certainly the city, it seems, is, and maybe you had this in your statistics, of the whole county, is the bulk of jobs in the city or outside of the city?
I don't know.
I can't remember
I'm not
if you
sure
had
if we
that.
have that stat. We could find that.
Yeah.
We could look into that. I don't have it off the top of my head. I'm not sure we pulled that for the community profile, but that could be an interesting thing to look at.
Well, and that also goes to land use in that in manufacturing, both, the percentage of people, I looked this up, or maybe you had it, that worked in manufacturing in 1960 was 32% of all Americans. And you probably know this better than most, that we're down to about 11%.
Yeah.
And that 90% of those jobs were not lost to outsourcing, but to technology.
Yeah.
That trend is, I think, going to continue. And the other thing that happened during that period is that, and while many of them are moving out, they're moving to suburban locations, although Steelcase was already out and had a huge chunk of land. But the way it's built, and we saw this on North Monroe when the furniture manufacturer buildings became empty, and now they're apartments or condos, so that's great. But so there's a role for the suburban that we can't fill in jobs, but when we look at the medical mile and those kind of jobs, so our economy, our city is built in such a way, and I think this is good news, is that the jobs that are unfortunately decreasing, the jobs that are increasing don't need as much land for them.
Yeah, it's
So
changing.
that's a
You're right.
huge change. It's like
Yeah.
when farming was the major economy driver back, and now I'm really dating myself, and then everybody moved into to manufacturing off the farms. So I think that is a huge trend that we've been seeing for 30 years. There's been a lot of, don't move my cheese kind of reaction to that, but.
Yeah. No, I think that's important to recognize. I think we've tried to talk a little bit about that in the plan where the types of manufacturing, the types of industrial
Yes.
change, and there's more clean tech and lab and things like that that
Yeah.
are happening that can be captured. The other important part of this is there's a statistic in the community profile about how much land within the city is really for that industrial use. It's only 6%. And our economist on the team, he's been really stressing that it's already a very small percentage, and some of those manufacturing places have closed and then apartments have gone, and there's a housing pressure for sure. So that is good, but we have to balance that, because once that land is gone, it's really hard to get it back. And so I think this sort of preserving what you have and then trying to retool and think about the different types of industries that you can have in the city and which ones make sense to be maybe out where there is more, more land. But that's something we're thinking about when we look at the future land use map for sure.
We talked about this. Is there any part of the plan that shows us vacancies in our land, like a building that's completely empty or lots that are empty by residential and business?
So I don't think we had plans to put that in the community master plan. We could certainly produce that. I'd be a little hesitant to put it in a plan because it's such a point in
Yeah,
time.
you're probably right, yeah.
But we definitely have that data.
Yeah, well, maybe I'm the only one interested, but if we do have it, I'd like to see it. Particularly in the housing part, when we're, looking at opportunities, and, now they're talking on Market, more housing, and over by the stadium, and, what are these things that drive more housing? It's just,
It's good information.
yes, thank you.
Sarah, on that point, you had the graphic that showed the interest in maintaining land for manufacturing uses, and it was 3.3 or something.
Yeah.
Do you have a sense of on the comments that were not so strongly in favor of that? Do you believe that was because out of a understanding that there's plenty of manufacturing jobs already, or does it come more out of the negative effects of manufacturing?
I think it's folks putting their sort of perspective or lens on manufacturing is dirty, the kind of belching industry of the past, which I think is not necessarily what the industry is of the future. And so I think there's some education there. So I think it was partly that. I think it was partly the pressure of the housing, the housing crisis and things that, I think it's easy to say, we got to put housing everywhere. But again, you've got to think about preserving the economy and jobs for people within the city as well, so that people don't have to travel way out to get to jobs. So there's that balance, and I think the reason that didn't maybe rank higher was those 2 points in particular, yeah.
There is a slide about, with 4 vertical bar graphs about building elements or something. I don't know
Yes.
if you could, and this is maybe not specific to this, but this slide is a little misleading because I feel like we're missing the bottom 2/3 of it, right? Because 2.9 and 3.05 are very close together, actually, but they show like the bar is twice as big as the other one, right? And I'm curious, just in general, as you're aggregating data, how do you handle that type of? To me, these are. I'm not a statistician, but they might be all within the margin.
Yeah, they're all
of
really
error,
close. Yeah,
right?
I think we
They're all-
exaggerated it so it would be visible, but you're right. 2.96, 3.0, and 3.05 are really like close together. Yeah.
So when you get data like that, how are you formulating recommendations? Because to me, this is basically they're all equal.
Yeah.
If I'm looking at it as a layperson, right?
Yeah, and I think that's good information. We know that when we work on design guidelines for this sort of the chapter, the desirable development character chapter, that we know these things are important and we're going to need to address them in each way. So it wasn't a very detailed question. It didn't get very deep, but we know. And we've been talking to planning staff about some of the challenges with some of the development that's come down, that's been built with the sort of connection of materials, way materials come together, the sort of depth, window placement, things like that, some of those details. And so I think this plan is going to try to address some of those things. We were trying to use this as a little bit of a test to see what was most important when people thought about their own neighborhoods. So I think it kind of reinforces that we do need to be thinking about exterior materials, bulk and height, parking, all the things. Yeah.
the one other question I had was, in the very beginning, we talked about youth participation. I'm curious, as I have youth at home, and just thinking about that, do you know the number? Like, how many youth? I know it was like a small percentage, but do you need 7 more to kind of reach your target, or is it 75? You know what I mean?
I think I don't have the exact numbers off the top of my head, but I think for this third round, like we can convert that into what our target sort of number is based on census data for fourth round. We were sort of doing this back into it, but I think what we learned is that 5 to 14, which is what we can get from the census data, only breaks it down certain ways, so we had to sort of use their numbers, their structure. But we felt like we hit that because we had mostly 12 to 17-year-olds. And let's see, let me go back so I don't miss an.
Oh, yeah, because your overall number is included.
Yeah, 11%. And so we had 12 to 17, ages 12 to 17 mainly, and we had 11% of those folks. 5 to 14 make up 10%. So we're actually oversampled, which is good. But yeah, for the fourth round, we can do the numbers so we know kind of what our target is, but yeah.
Yeah, I was just curious. And then
Go ahead.
No, that's it.
Leila, do you want to talk about some of the efforts that you and Sarah Tani specifically have done to help with the youth engagement? Because I think what this slide tells us is that we need to remain intentional in our efforts, and we have done that. Not to say clearly we're still not meeting that target, but it tells us to stay focused on it.
Yes, so city staff has looked at these gaps as the round is progressing because we get them updated maybe every 2 to 3 weeks during the round. So then we go out and try to engage who are missing. So for youth, we went last summer to Parks and Rec has summer camps. So we went and engaged children there. They were primarily younger, so we had them like drop pictures and things, and then we asked them, what are you showing here, and sort of wrote down some keywords. We also have been to high schools. We've been to GRPS's Innovation High School. We've been to GR Christian High School. We've also gone and tabled at GRCC, and that's really good for getting the 18 to 24-year-olds and the some college, no degree. But we have also, I know some of our connectors went to Grand Valley. I speak to a Grand Valley class yearly and try to bring any engagement activities that I have. We also have an intern right now who is a Grand Valley student, and she's involved with the geography club there. I might be getting the name slightly wrong, but we've asked her to blast this, to her email list. So we're really trying, but if you know any 18 to 24-year-olds, particularly if they have like TikTok skills, tell them to make videos, to tell people to go to our online survey and do it further. I think, the video would get their attention, but then to actually have them translate that to going to the website and doing the online engagement would be amazing. And the city doesn't have a TikTok, but maybe some people could help with that.
We should share a staff member for that. We don't have that either.
Sarah, you work all around the country. Do you have any general reflections on what you're hearing from this community?
I mean, no, I think that it's amazing to me that we're gearing up for our final round. There was a question that came out of the steering committee yesterday about the sort of ranking in the numbers, like 3.32 or 3.92. Is that typical? Is that good? Is that about trying to understand? And I said, no, that's good. I mean, we've done our job collectively if we get to this point in the process and people are generally supportive. We didn't see a 1.5 something or really anything under 2. And so, and most stuff was up in the 3s and upper 3s and 4s. So at this point, I feel like people, we've been iterative, right? So we've taken their input and it started more generative, open-ended brainstorming. We've worked with that. Then now we're putting things back forth in front of them. And what my takeaway is that people here feel like they've been heard and listened to, and that's reflective. So I think that's really good. I think from a national perspective, a lot of places we work, there's not conversations around density or adding more housing or things like that. So I think the city generally, I was surprised at how supportive your general community is, and they understand the housing need. They understand that the city plays a crucial role and how that can happen. And having to think a little differently or being a little creative in order to solve that. I think was particularly interested in how much the general community really values sustainability and thinking about the environment and climate mitigation, adaptation. And so that's been really interesting because, again, we work across the country and those conversations aren't happening everywhere. So that was really good and sort of different for us to see here.
And Kristen, can you share your feelings about how the engagement has gone? I know you wanted the steering committee to really oversee the engagement process, and wondering if you have any reflections on that.
Yeah, I think that the steering committee has really been instrumental in helping us reach into the community, and they've been very supportive. I think I mentioned earlier, we've been testing all of our presentations, all of the content, all of the engagement activities with the steering committee, and we get great feedback from them. So if we know that an activity, for example, needs to be tweaked or isn't quite landing the way we thought when we have our meetings weekly, we know that we have an opportunity to be able to adjust so that we are able to get better feedback from community when we are going out. They've been very involved and extremely helpful in guiding us. I think the community connectors, I don't know if Leila, you want to speak to their work since you're more engaged with the connector program or not. But I think that that's just another great tool that we've had that helps go beyond maybe some of that traditional open house style community-wide meeting to be able to have some more intimate and comfortable conversations and try different things like it wasn't the walk and talks. What did it, the move and talks.
Yeah. So, that's a good. So the open call meetings, 3 workshops we had, that attracts a certain folks who, feel comfortable coming out, can come out. We try to then augment that with the online opportunity. And then the community connectors and neighborhood organizations play a really critical role in going to the different neighborhoods and different groups and being a lot more deliberate and intentional and gathering people together kind of where they are. And so in the 3rd round, we did move and talks. And so we had a whole series of materials, and folks could focus in on certain like mobility or housing, different topics that were important in their particular neighborhood. And they created a little walking route. They invited, a small group of folks to come, and they actually walked around and have made observations, talked about what they see today. They brought storytellers in. They talked about what it was. So in some communities, there's really rich stories about what was there before, and then talked about what they're observing and what's here now. And then a moment at the end was about kind of being visionary and thinking about what they want to see or what they need in the future. And so I will say that in all of our statistics here on the charts and things about the different demographics, it looks very different until we incorporate all the community connectors and neighborhood organization works. It really helps us. We haven't closed the gaps in all of them, but they really help us get closer. So they are, I think, really effective in getting out into community and meeting people where they are.
So I am very grateful that we set this up the way we did as a community, because I think we've been able to operate with a level of intentionality that past planning efforts have not necessarily done. And I think that just evolves based on what the needs are of the community, not a criticism of past efforts. It's just that we have a community that has different needs and expectations today than we did 20 years ago. And so we are strategizing as to how best to engage community based on what we know.
So I'm a little nervous making this comment, so I apologize. I'm probably developing quite the reputation for myself, but I think the amount of work that's gone into this thus far is great, and overall, I really appreciate the presentation. The one thing that I was surprised to see was the talking about neighborhood character and development character. There's been a lot of connections made in the last probably 5 years between the idea of neighborhood character and systemic or structural racism. So I understand why people would support the idea of neighborhood character, and you would see people wanting to talk about that, but I question whether or not that should be it should be included in our plan, just given and again, I don't know enough to talk about it intelligently, but I do know that the question has been raised to the point where I would personally question or have to research more, like, is supporting the idea of neighborhood character even appropriate?
Great. I appreciate your thoughts, but character to me is, how it looks and the style of housing and things. Is that what you're talking about?
Well, it's very difficult for me to elaborate as a white male, so it's one of the reasons why I said that I know that it's been brought up and I know it's been raised as a concern, and I think that I just don't want it to be overlooked.
Okay.
I exist in an environment where I'm not necessarily experiencing it personally, and it's difficult for me to speak to directly. I just know that the concern exists and want to make sure it's being addressed appropriately.
Thank you.
Can I interject there? Not to speak on the behalf of the black delegation or anything, but I do think that puts words to how some black folks can approach this topic. I mean, just like with everything, when it comes to character and development, we just don't see everything the same, right? So if I'm walking through a neighborhood and they have colonial houses, and most of my friends that I walk with, these are beautiful, and I'm like, this is terrible, So I think that when it comes to style, when it comes to like our perceived or our set standards of what we think is appropriate in terms of character and development and what we're necessarily looking for, it doesn't match different cultures. It's usually one culture, and we base our decisions on that. And then we say, basically, you get in line, you deal with this, or we don't. So if I'm going into a residential neighborhood and I want to build a new building that doesn't look the way that the other buildings look, but it looks nice, it looks neat, it's a different take, then we would probably shoot that down because it doesn't match the character and development of the neighborhood.
I appreciate that. I wonder if some of that sentiment is captured with that lower importance on architecture, but a higher importance on like building materials and quality of materials.
Yeah, it makes me want to go back and look at those comments a little more, because we did ask for additional comments on that piece. I'm pretty sure it wasn't just we usually don't ever just ask like a multiple choice question without also offering a chance for people to comment. So I will go back and look and see if we've got any other comments that sort of support that. I know that, one of the things that I think has come up through the steering committee conversations is just the importance of preserving culture, whatever culture that is within the city, and how that sometimes gets erased when you redevelop and do different things. So I think that it all kind of plays in there, but I think maybe going back and looking at some of those comments more deliberately might give us something to kind of focus on, or at least make sure that we're being intentional around that topic.
Can I just say, just to piggyback up on that, like sometimes even that can be dangerous, right? When we say that we want to preserve the culture, because then essentially what we do is we lock in everything exactly where it is. So that may keep white folks from moving into black neighborhoods, but it keeps black folks from moving out of those same neighborhoods. So it's not easy. It's difficult, right? It's a constant back and forth on trying to just get what people want where they want it. And then everybody has to essentially give up something, which is not easy for anyone. So.
Why don't we go back through those comments and, if the Planning Commission, three of you at least have commented, I wonder if it's worth us going back through and giving some thought that maybe we need to probe this a little bit further through round 4. We don't currently have anything specific.
Yeah, but we can include it. It's not too late. Yeah. Yeah, let me go look back at those comments and let's have some follow-up conversation about how we might address that more deliberately in round 4.
Have you ever seen in a master planning like this, that you do focus groups amongst different minorities in particular who might even be included in it, but their voice might not be as heard? And I don't want to, I just am saying, how do we I wouldn't have thought of that. And I appreciate that you did as a white male, but I wonder if there are other ways to get that kind of past our white, Caucasian, this is the way it should look and be, and all of those other things. And other voices, while they're at the table, might not have
Right.
as clear as a say in what that could mean.
Yeah, I think that's a good role for our community connectors and neighborhood organizations to play. Like they really are. That group was put together intentionally to be representative across the community. They're reaching out to some of those harder to reach populations and some of the groups. So I think that is a good place that maybe we can kind of focus them and orient them around that a little bit more. We did some stakeholder meetings at the very beginning of this process, but they were more sort of topical, not necessarily like demographic-based or kind of location-based or certain groups within the community. So, but I think the community connectors, we can bring this up to that group, and I think they will embrace trying to help fill that gap maybe at this point in the process as well, to make sure we're really being inclusive.
Kristen was able to meet with is it Human Relations Commission?
The Community Relations
Community
Commission.
Relations, and I think that's another way to get that kind of oversight. So I appreciate that part of it as a way of outreach and communication and input.
Oh, no.
All right, any other questions or comments for Sarah and Layla?
Thank you very much.
Yeah, on behalf of the Planning Commission, thank you, Sarah and Layla, for leading us through this, and Kristen as well.
Thank you.
And then we, as is our custom, will open up to public comment for anyone who would like to address the commission. Make your way up to the microphone, state your name for the record, and you'll have up to 3 minutes to share your thoughts.
Hi there, my name is Michael Dupree. I'm new to this town, moved here in November, and started building. Well, tried to start building. I'm currently working on a project on Umatilla Street, which is near Hall and Madison, if you're familiar with that. So I've been learning a lot about code and ordinance and things like that, and I noticed this presentation talked about a lot of things, but one thing it didn't mention that I didn't notice was income. And I think a huge piece of this puzzle is what data are we getting from people in certain income categories and where they specifically live or want to live. And if we don't nail that information down, I think it's going to be tough to have a data set of almost non-residents. So if you're living in suburbia and you're a $600,000 home and you're saying, I think sidewalks are important, and I think that the facade is really important, and I think parking should be considered, it's very different than if you're on Umatilla Street, where I measured yesterday and there's 12 feet in between the two cars parked on the street. And that same neighborhood is not a high-income neighborhood. So currently the zoning says I need to put a driveway 20 feet past the back of the house. I don't know if you guys have priced out concrete lately, but that's very expensive. I did the math, and the differences I need to make to the facade, the transparency, the driveway, things like that, are about, on this duplex I'm building, about $25,000 to $35,000 each. Now, if we take a 7% interest rate and extend it over 30 years, it's like $50,000. So if you're living on a budget and you want to move into a neighborhood, and the code says, oh, well, we took the votes from everybody, and they said that facade matters and that parking is important, and so we took all these things into consideration, and now we have this new regulation, this new zoning, and we're going to roll it out to everybody, and all the builders are like, okay, here's the new code, let's go and build, and we have to stay in those parameters. That end user, that homeowner who's trying to get into their home or rent it, is going to spend $50,000 over the next 30 years. And if you break that down, it's what, $150 a month? And if you ask that person, hey, if you had to choose, this is one thing I'd recommend for the data set. if you had to choose this or that, would it be money or would it be facade? Would it be money or would it be parking? Would it be like affordability or not? And I think when you look at those things, the data they give you back is different. Because it's easy for me to say, hey, yeah, I think that parking matters. I think this matters. But if that's going to be an extra $400 a month, I'll park in the front. I don't need to park 20 feet behind my house. And also, when you drive on that road, I can't fit my car there or turn around and park back in, back out, whatever else. If I have visitors, where are they going to go? These are important things. What if the neighbor throws a party and now you didn't consider parking on the street or parking in the back? So anyway, these are all really big things to consider. And I think that if we don't consider those things, all we're going to do is pass the bill on to the end user. So I recommend that in this data set or in these considerations that we also talk with builders and people in the construction industry and say, if I were to implement these things, what do you think it would cost by percentage to build a home? And how does that change the affordability? Because we're short on houses and more codes means slower building process, and we're short on affordability, affordable homes. So the more regulations, the more expensive it is for us to produce. And now we're just putting people out of a home. So anyway, if the goal is to build affordable housing, I think that should be a major piece of the conversation. And I didn't hear money mentioned at all today, and I think it should be considered.
Got it. Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, we'll close the public comment period. Anything you want to comment on? Any further discussion amongst the commission?
To the speaker, I think that is an important point. It's like, you want affordable housing, what's it going to take to get that, and how does that translate into what the code is in a way of looking at it? I think that was something too when I looked at, we want healthcare jobs, but we didn't want Cornwall to accumulate property. Well, they did accumulate, but to build parking lots, when we're missing the bigger picture by having rules that are just rules around parking or rules around this. So I really appreciate that, both looking at the income, but the higher goals that we have, and we have them outlined, I think, in the plan, needs to then make sure that the affordable housing and learning from contractors, and you learn this all the time, this is going to cost me this much more, is an important part of us looking at when we say you have to have parking or you can't use parking in front of, well, that's not going to make it affordable.
Yeah. So part of the engagement strategy does cut across all demographics and all neighborhoods of the city. So we did not, I don't believe we collected feedback based on income or had an income question. Am I correct on that?
Right. Yeah, we've stopped asking that question just kind of as a best practice. People tend to get offended by it. They don't know how we're using it. So we used to, 10 years ago, ask an income question, but it was usually the least answered. Some people would answer it, but not all. So it wasn't. So the education's kind of a proxy, but that's not one for one. And so I think just trying to be as inclusive and widespread and get across the community, as Kristen said, has really been our tactic. But yeah, we have not collected income information.
Yeah, and I would probably separate out some of the processes. For me, this is more of a larger vision at a much higher level in terms of it's setting a vision for the community of how we build and what we want to see generally, but some of the comments relative to the amount of impervious surface that extends beyond the home, those are conversations that will take place as part of the implementation strategy, so the zoning ordinance update. So I believe we do consider that. It does in some ways reflect or come from the vision that is set forth through the community master plan. So fencing, for example, when we were last out into community, we heard that chain link fences in front yards is not an appropriate style fence generally. And so, of course, what that means is that it can be a more expensive fence in a front yard. So there is certainly a correlation that I think we need to be cognizant of, and even more so as we move forward with this round. Part of, the housing conversation and need for affordability. You'll know that with the current round of text amendments that the city has is looking exactly at that, is to look at where we can allow duplexes and up to sixplexes administratively or by right, not requiring parking in association with small-scale residential in our traditional neighborhoods when located along those specified street types. Allowing for accessory dwelling units by right, not going through a planning commission review process, looking at increasing the number of unrelated occupants. So the last round of text amendments that were recommended by the planning commission do look at ways that we can increase housing types to increase affordability, adding more supply, streamlining review processes. So that's not quite to Michael, I believe, Michael's point specifically, but generally that is absolutely something that the city is interested in continuing. I think that there certainly are ways for us to look at our zoning ordinance relative to the amount of impervious surface example. I have received a number of complaints about exactly that, about the amount of concrete and the cost of concrete, and I think that that's something that definitely needs to be looked at, and there's ways that we can increase affordability if we really evaluate the requirements within the zoning ordinance to determine how it impacted and how it impacts affordability. I'm not sure if I said that right. Hopefully I did. And I think focus group meetings with builders and architects is something absolutely that would be critical. We've done that with various amendments so far. When we met in 2018 for Housing Now, I did convene a group of architects because it was specific to design requirements. We met with architects when and contractors when we looked at rezoning portions of, or excuse me, not rezoning, for the height amendments in the downtown to make sure that we calibrated the appropriate height level relative to the cost of construction to make sure that, if we said 14 stories was the maximum height, does 14 stories really make sense, or does it make it unaffordable and we really needed it to be 16 stories? So those were the kinds of conversations that we did have with contractors and architects. So I would expect that not to be any different as we move forward through implementation, is to meet with builders and architects, contractors, to make sure that whatever the regulatory framework, well, I don't say whatever, the regulatory framework that we adopt to implement this plan has to absolutely be based in real world circumstances like cost of construction. So I don't know that that addresses entirely what Michael had said, except that, yes, it's important. Yes, it's a focus. Not all of those concerns can be addressed through the master plan, but will be addressed through the combination of the community master plan in combination with the zoning ordinance update, which is the next project.
I think that's a good note. I do appreciate all of the conversation and all of the information, of course, shared today, all of this information that we're collecting in order to make these decisions. I think it's a huge deal. I think one of the sentiments from him that I'm hearing just from my peers and also Phil as well, and you've said that, I feel like you just said it too, making the code just as people-oriented as we want our city to be. And, there are things that folks who are either moving into the city or moving out of their parents' house looking into the city, there are things that we're looking for today that we didn't look for, at the last master plan drawing, or things that we cared about at the last master plan that we just don't care about now. For my friends who were able to buy a house, none of them asked what's the character of the neighborhood. They were just like, I just want a nice house that I can afford, and hopefully it has a front yard. Other than that, it was just all about getting the person in the house. So I do appreciate that, and I think that's what we've done. At least since I've been here, trying to make the code more people-oriented and more people-focused rather than, bogging it down with another rule, with another regulation that makes it more expensive or make it less likely that developers and or people would want to come into the city. So I appreciate that.
Any further discussion? Then we're adjourned.